Bonnie's hand shook with frustration as she finished writing her soapy message on the restroom mirror. Help! Denny Thurman kidnapped. Matt and Bonnie Schulter. Gun. She no longer believed any of the customers would take her plea seriously. Not today, when the restaurant was hosting a mystery meal where the diners try to solve a fake crime. Her only hope was for an actress to see the message and realize it wasn't part of the mystery script. Behind her, Matt came out of the stall. Why didn't you back me up? Bonnie demanded. Why didn't you tell those women I wasn't acting? Matt looked embarrassed. I didn't want anyone to see me in the girls' bathroom. He pointed at the wall behind Bonnie. Let's climb out the window, he said. Bonnie eyed the window, a narrow rectangle of frosted glass high on the wall above the radiator, and wondered if she could squeeze through it. It's worth a try, she said. She climbed on the radiator, reached up, and turned the latch. When she pushed on the window frame, the bottom moved outward. The opening was only about a foot wide. Matt could probably get through it, but she wasn't sure she could fit. You first, she said as Matt scrambled up and stood beside her on the radiator. She bent over with her hands on her knees. Stand on my back. I think you'll be able to reach the window. Matt climbed on Bonnie's back, then stood up and grabbed the window frame. Hurry, she said. You're heavy. Matt swung one leg up and through the opening, then the other leg. He slid down outside of the building and dangled for a moment, still grasping the ledge with both hands. It isn't too far down, he said. Rubbing her back, Bonnie straightened up. Let go, she said. If I get stuck, don't wait for me. Run away. Get help. He released his grip and dropped to the ground. I'm okay, he called. You can do it too, Bonnie. You'll fit. Quickly, Bonnie pulled herself up by sucking in her breath and scraping her back on the top of the opening. She squeezed through. She dropped down beside Matt. They stood beside 3 garbage cans in a short, narrow alley on the backside of the restaurant. At the end of the alley, cars drove past on the street and ran along the side of the building. We could hide in garbage cans, Matt said. Bonnie shook her head. Let's run for it, she said. We'll flag down a car and get help. Together, the children bolted toward the street. Parked vehicles lined the curb. Bonnie and Matt stepped between 2 parked cars on the street, then waved frantically at an approaching white Toyota. The Toyota's driver frowned at them and kept going. Denny paced nervously back and forth beside the hostess station. What was taking those kids so long? They should have been back by now. The noise level in the restaurant continued to increase. A man rushed out of the restroom, claiming to have been robbed at gunpoint, which put the whole place in an uproar. Denny's head started to ache. When Miss Clueless returned, Denny said, My kids haven't come out of the restroom. Could you check to see if they're all right? Miss Clueless, looking annoyed, headed for the ladies' bathroom. Instead of going all the way in, she opened up the door, poked her head in the anteroom, and called, Anybody there? No one answered. A few seconds later, she returned. They aren't there, she said. Maybe you missed them and they're waiting outside. Denny put a hand on her arm. Are you sure? Of course I'm sure. If you don't believe me, go look for yourself. The ladies' room's empty. I'm too busy to babysit his kids, she thought. This guy was not even a paying customer. Denny rushed past her down the hall and pushed open the door of the women's bathroom. As he stepped into the anteroom, a woman came toward him on her way out. Denny stopped. The woman screamed. Sorry, Denny said as he backed away. Peeping Tom, the woman said. For shame. I'm looking for my kids, he said. The hostess said nobody was in here. I can see why, she said. It's freezing in here. I just came in, but it's too cold to use the facilities. The toilet seat would feel like an ice cube. If you're one of those actors, tell the manager to have someone close the window and turn on the heat. Denny looked over the woman's shoulder at the open window. No, he said. He dashed out of the restroom, brushed Miss Clueless out of the way, and opened the door. He ran out, looked both directions, then raced to the corner, where he turned and ran alongside the building until he reached the alley. From there, he could see the open window, but he did not see Matt and Bonnie. He ran down the alley toward the other street. A dark green van came toward the frantic children. Help, Bonnie shouted as she waved at the van. We need help. The van stopped for a red light. The windows, both in the front and the rear, went down. 3 teenage boys looked out. "What's the problem?" the boy in the back seat asked. "Take us with you," Bonnie said. "We'll explain after we get away from here." The boys looked at one another. "Please," Bonnie said, "you have to help us." The driver said, "We don't have to do anything. My old man would kill me if I picked up hitchhikers." "They're kids," one of the other boys said. "Maybe they really need help. Maybe they're working the streets, and as soon as we unlock the doors, a gang of carjackers shows up and gets in with them." "There's no gang," Bonnie said. "My brother's dad has a gun and he's making us go with him. Please, please let us in. You don't have to take us far. Drive us to the nearest police officer and we'll get out." "There are cops all over directing traffic," the boy in the back said. "We'd only have to take them a few blocks." "We don't have time to argue," Bonnie said. She tried to open the rear door of the van, but it was locked. "Hey, you there!" Denny's voice came from behind them. "You leave my kids alone." Matt started to cry. "He's trying to kidnap us," Bonnie told the boys. "He stole my brother. Now he's trying to take me, too." Denny reached the van. "You young punks," he said. "I ought to turn you into the cops trying to lure children into your car." "We didn't do anything," the driver said. "They waved for us to stop." "You expect me to believe that?" Denny said. "I'll let my kids out of my sight for 2 minutes and some pervert tries to snatch them." "He's lying," Bonnie said. "If you won't help us, at least go tell the police what we told you. He's abducting us." "She's lying," Denny said. "She stole money from her teacher and now she's trying to run away." The 3 boys gaped at Bonnie. The light changed. The driver behind the van honked his horn. "Get out of here before I decide to teach you a lesson," Denny snarled. "How would one of your parents react if you're arrested for trying to molest a child?" The windows shot up and the van sped away. Bonnie's hope of getting rescued went with it. Denny glared at her. "I told you not to talk to anyone." Bonnie didn't answer. Beside her, Matt continued to cry softly. Bonnie expected Denny to march them back to the other street where they'd been walking. But instead, he raised his hand and hailed a passing taxicab. "Get in," he said. "What about your car?" Matt asked. "I'll get it tomorrow. We're going to miss the ferry if we waste any more time." They piled into the back seat of the cab. Bonnie hoped the cab driver would remember them later. When she didn't return to her seat at Safeco Field, she knew a huge police search would ensue. Maybe the cabbie would recall a crying boy and a scared girl and an angry-looking man. Maybe he would tell the police where he dropped them off and what the man looked like. Bonnie realized Denny looked nothing like the police sketch of the man suspected of taking Matt. That man had dark curly hair and a mustache. Denny was blonde and clean-shaven. Bonnie wondered if he had a rose tattoo on his arm. Heavy traffic blocked the streets. As the cab crept down First Avenue and idled at red lights, Bonnie tried to figure out how to escape. If only Denny didn't have a gun. She could have screamed in the stadium or run to the traffic cop or asked Miss Clueless to call for help. If Denny wasn't armed, she and Matt could even jump out of the cab right now while it stopped at a red light. But he did have a gun, and he'd threatened to use it on Matt. So Bonnie kept silent and stayed in the taxi. When they reached the ferry terminal, Bonnie slipped her hand in her pocket and withdrew her ticket stub from the ball game and laid it on the seat. It wasn't the greatest clue in the world, but it was the best she could do. She hoped the driver cleaned out the cab after every fare. Denny asked the cab driver to wait. "I'll have to leave the meter running," the driver said. "No problem," Denny said. "Aren't we going to the ferry?" Matt asked as they walked up the ramp beside a non-working escalator. "We're going," Denny said. "Why did you have the cab driver wait?" "So I didn't have to pay him. By the time he realizes we aren't coming back, we'll be gone." What a mean trick, Bonnie thought. In the terminal, Matt paused by a huge antique clock, but Denny said they didn't have time to look at it. He went straight to the ticket window and bought 3 tickets for Bainbridge Island. "You barely made it," the ticket person said. "Walk on, start boarding at the gate in a few minutes." As Denny paid for the tickets, Bonnie stood behind him and waved at the ticket seller to get her attention. When the woman looked at her, Bonnie mouthed the word help. She pointed at Denny, then made a gun with her thumb and her pointer finger and pretended to shoot Matt. The startled woman looked from Bonnie to Denny and then back at Bonnie. Bonnie quickly dropped her hand as Denny took his change. They continued past the ticket booth. As they walked away, Bonnie glanced over her shoulder. The woman in the ticket booth stared after them. Please, Bonnie thought. Please call the police and tell them which ferry we're on. Denny draped his arm across Bonnie's shoulder, his fingers digging into her arm. Smile, he said, under his breath. Act happy. Bonnie gritted her teeth and forced a smile. Wonder how long the cabbie'll sit there, Denny said, before he figures out we aren't coming back. They joined a crowd waiting on to board. College students chattered about their classes. One man had an assistant's dog, and a woman pushed a baby stroller. A sign beside the door said attention in red letters. It warned people to report suspicious activity to ferry workers. I did, Bonnie thought. I warned the ticket seller. She looked behind her and saw a man in uniform. Across the lobby near the big clock, the bright green vest that he wore over his uniform said Seattle Police. Bonnie held her breath. Had the ticket seller called the police already? Was the officer coming to talk to her right now? She pretended to scratch her shoulder, so she had a reason to keep looking back. Instead of entering the room where the ticketed passengers waited to board, the police officer stopped to chat with a man who was mopping the floor. Your attention, please. Walk-on passengers to Bainbridge Island may now board at Gate 2. Bonnie and Matt, with Denny at their heels, joined the crowd that filed down the ramp on the huge white and green ferry. In the middle of so many people, Bonnie felt all alone. The last few cars drove aboard. Attendants in lime green vests with orange stripes directed the drivers where to park and put blocks of wood in front of the tires of the cars nearest the front. Soon the ramp raised and the ferry backed away from the dock. Denny took the first vacant bench seat and had Bonnie sit next to the window with Matt in the middle, next to Denny. He fidgeted and kept glancing around. After only a few moments, he said, There are too many people in here. We're going down to the car deck. They descended 2 flights of stairs to the deck that was closest to the water. The ferry wasn't full. Only half the parking spaces held cars, and they were all at the other end, facing the direction the ferry was going. Gulls swooped beside the ferry, their raucous cries riding high over the noise of engines and the churning water. Bonnie watched the Seattle skyline grow smaller as the ferry moved west. Under other circumstances, she would have enjoyed picking out Seattle's landmarks. The Pacific Science Center, the Space Needle, the grain terminal. Huge orange cargo cranes, the kind used to load containers into barges or freighters, stood guard all along the waterfront. She could see the curved tops of Seahawks Stadium and Safeco Field. Was the Mariners game over yet? Were Nancy and her mother and the rest of the track team frantically searching for her? I should have never followed Denny by myself, Bonnie thought. I knew he was dangerous. What was I thinking? Instead of getting on the escalator, I should have run to the nearest concession booth and asked an adult to call the police. By the time Denny walked to his car, the police would have been there. Denny would be under arrest at this time, and Matt would be on his way home. Instead, Mom was probably getting a call right now telling her Bonnie was missing too. Poor Mom. She was already stressed out. And so were Grandma and Grandpa. They would really fall apart over this latest development. What am I going to do? Bonnie wondered. How can I get us out of this mess without being shot?